For those who aren't familiar with it, I'm looking at the Democratic primary predictions forecast on the 538.com website. The address is at the top. It might be a little hard to read. I'll try to remember to put it in the description. It's projects.538.com/2020-primary-forecast. The 538 is spelled out, no spaces in it. It's not digits. At any rate, yesterday I was out walking with a friend of mine, talking with him about various things, and I mentioned this site and its predictions, and was explaining to him that in terms of how each candidate is predicted, how likely the chances are of each candidate winning half of the pledged delegates, or more than half of the pledged delegates. In other words, a majority rather than just a plurality of the votes in the first round of delegate votes at the Democratic National Convention. That Bernie had been in the lead, and then no one got ahead of him. And I don't mean there wasn't anyone who got ahead of him. I mean literally no one got ahead of him, because the chances of no one getting more than half the pledged delegates got slightly higher than the chance of Bernie Sanders getting half the pledged delegates. Now it's changed back again, so Bernie is beating no one. And when I said that, Bernie beats no one at getting more than half the pledged delegates, I was saying, we were passing by someone going the other way who apparently heard me say Bernie beats no one, and my friend says, "Did you hear what he said?" And I said no, and he said except our president. So I had to laugh, and I don't know if that guy will ever see this video. Probably not, but I hope so, because then he'll know what I meant. And I did wish I had had the chance to go back and explain it to him, but we were on our way somewhere, so that didn't happen. Any rate, what this is, this graph shows, well, first off, they're asking the question, who will win the 2020 Democratic primary? And they have Nate Silver, I believe is the name of the guy who runs this. I'll try to remember to do credits at the end. I want to keep this short, but hopefully I'll be able to get that in there and not forget it. But for now, I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Any rate, it's a simulation that goes through each stage of the Democratic primaries and caucuses as they would happen, and predicts each one based on what's known of polls and surveys and stuff like that. I'm not sure what all data they put into there, but they've got information that they plug into their simulator, and they run this thing thousands of times, and it comes up with, they have it calculate averages of those runs. And so this information is based on those averages. So 42%, in 42% of those runs, what this is saying here is in 42% of those runs, Bernie Sanders ends up with more than half of the pledged delegates in the first round of votes at the Democratic National Convention. After all the other contests are over, almost half of the simulation runs are showing Bernie Sanders ending up with more than half of the pledged delegates. 42% is more precisely. Now they show it here as the ratio 2 in 5, and then they also show no one with the same ratio, 2 in 5. I believe the threshold there is 45%, is where they switch it to then saying 1 in 2 instead of 2 in 5. But those ratios are a lot less precise. The percentages are more precise, so I'll go with the percentage. It's not that one's more accurate than the other. It's a matter of precision. That that 2 and 5 is a little bit vague. We'll put it that way, because there's a range of percentages that would all show up as 2 and 5, that look different as percentages. If you look at these lines here, you can see this cyan line here that started out before they were running their forecast simulation, just based on polls. Bernie Sanders was expected to do much worse than Joe Biden. Joe Biden's got name recognition. He's an ex-vice president. He served 8 years under Obama in the White House, so very well known, and that works to his advantage. So it was expected that he was the most likely to win. When the simulation started running, it stayed that way for a while, and then as they got more data, and as the people started to find out more about Bernie Sanders is running, that started to change. And from my own experience, and I'm still running into this, a lot of people still don't know Bernie Sanders is running yet. There are a lot of people who really wanted him to win in 2016, and a lot of people didn't realize that he was actually an option in 2016, that he didn't actually quit or drop out. What he did was support another candidate that he thought would be more likely to beat Donald Trump, because the Democratic National Committee decided to back that other candidate, and he didn't think that he could beat Donald Trump without their support. And we proved him right on that. We could have proved him wrong. We made Bernie Sanders a certified writing candidate here in California, for example. And we made him a valid writing candidate in a lot of other places where he would not have been otherwise. And I actually did the math. If the people who support him would have voted for him, he would have won. That simple. He would have won the popular vote, and he would have won the Electoral College. Perhaps not outright. That's hard to say, but he did have enough support that he at least could have won in various ways that it is possible to win that. I'm not going to get into the details because, like I said, I want to keep this short. But the point I want to make here is that we make the odds. You look at how these lines are changing, they're going up and down. That's over time. That's what the odds seem to be at any given time. And that's not just a matter of that things seem different at one time than they seem at another time. Things actually get different. When people find out that Bernie Sanders is running, who really want him to win, the chances of that person going out to vote for Bernie Sanders go up quite a bit over their odds of doing that when they don't know that he's running for president. That makes a difference. Things change, and the odds change as a result. Go out and talk to people. Tell them what you want. Tell them why you want it. Explain it to them. Hear them out. Maybe they're right and you're wrong. Hear them out. See what they have to say. Make up your own mind. But keep in mind that we make the odds. It is nice to have a prediction like this. It's nice to have. This is a nice simulation. It's good to have. It's nice information. But we can prove it right or we can prove it wrong. That's up to us collectively. Not up to me personally or you personally. It's up to us collectively. And each one of us can choose to do our part, or we can choose not to do our part, or we can just not choose and end up not doing our part. I mean, it's unlikely we're going to do our part if we don't decide to do it and get out there and put work into it, because it takes work. And anybody out there who's thinking that Bernie Sanders only has lazy people supporting him should look at how many volunteers he's got. People don't volunteer to work hard if they're lazy. They're fighting for other people. They're fighting for people other than themselves. That's how we make a better world. Fight for each other. Bernie understands that. I understand it. A lot of us understand it. Some of us don't. Some people think the way to make the world better is to basically crap on everybody else and fight for yourself. And that's because the only world they see is the little bit of it that affects them personally. And sadly, they're screwing us over big time. So, yeah. Gonna move on. The next section in this page, this graph, this chart, whatever you want to call it, shows how many pledged delegates are expected to be won by each candidate. How many pledged delegates in the Democratic National Convention? I don't know if this is first round or this is, well, I guess this is all together because they run the whole simulation. So if it's first round, it stops there, and if it goes on to a second round, then they've got that and the superdelegates. But they're not showing the superdelegates here, just the pledged delegates, because there's no way to guess what the superdelegates are going to do. I mean, not accurately anyway. They're going to do what they're going to do because they're not representing the people, they're representing themselves. Superdelegates is a misnomer. They're not delegates at all. They're only given the power of a delegate. And what a delegate does in that contest, when the delegates vote, a delegate casts their vote on behalf of a large group of people. That's why they're called pledged delegates, because they are pledged to vote for who the people voted for. So they're basically just passing on the vote. They're a proxy. And if they break their pledge and vote for someone else, then they're screwing over all those people. Well, the superdelegates are there to screw over the people by default. That's what they do. Because they're not voting on behalf of a large group of people. They're voting with the power of a large group of people for whatever they want, personally. And if that's in their own best interest, well, then they have a good chance of, making things better for themselves. And if they think it's in their best interest and they're wrong, then they have a good chance of accidentally hurting themselves. But they don't have the advantage of multiple brains doing their thinking for them, like the pledged delegates do. Which, by the way, pledged delegates shouldn't be people. They should just be a number. If we're going to have them at all, if we're going to have delegates or electors at all, that should just be a number. And I think better yet, just go with the popular vote. But at any rate, just looking at what this chart is actually saying, right now we're in between the New Hampshire primaries and the Nevada caucuses. And if you look, all the lines are way down here near zero during that range of time. And that is because there are hardly any delegates available during that time. I mean, pledged delegates haven't been pledged to anyone, and they haven't picked pledged delegates for most of the contests yet. And the two contests that they have been picked for, how many pledged delegates go to one candidate or another candidate, that's a very small number of pledged delegates compared to the, I don't know what the exact number is, but around 3,000, as you see 3,000 at the top of this chart. That's possible to get by the end. I think I have seen the actual full number. I don't recall what it was, 3,000 and something, I think. I think it's slightly over 3,000, might have been slightly under, but it is, I'm pretty sure, around 3,000. Bernie Sanders is expected, on the average, to get more than half of that. 1,660 it's showing here as his average, which is more than twice the average of what Biden gets. Now, when I say the average, what I mean is when they run this simulation thousands of times, they take the average number of delegates won by a candidate in each of those runs, and they divide it by the, add those up and divide it by the number of runs. So you're getting an average. Um, and yeah, Joe Biden's average is less than half of Bernie Sanders' average, and everybody else is less than both of them. So, moving on from there. Um, let's see, I'm just going to do it this way. Let's go straight to the contests that have already been finished. Here's the Iowa forecasts and results. That's for the Iowa caucus or caucuses. And I want to go. I'm going to go in a little extra detail on this one, just because of the fact that, well, there were problems in it, and I don't know if it's completely resolved yet, but corrections have been made, and a lot of people might not know those corrections have been made. I want to bring up a little sidebar in the middle here. This is showing the number of delegates given out to each candidate. And you might notice Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders are tied at 13 delegates each. Now, the news told everybody that Buttigieg had more delegates than Bernie Sanders. Well, for a while, he did have more national delegates. He had 14 and Bernie Sanders had 12, because one of Bernie Sanders' delegates had been errantly given to Pete Buttigieg. That is not... That's not a matter of the counting of the votes. They still should recount those votes, at least recanvass them, or whatever it is they call it. But I think they should recount them, if not have the whole caucus over again, because they really screwed it up big time. But this is a correction of basically a paperwork error, which I guess took a while to get corrected because of, bureaucracy. But they did get that corrected, and so they are tied in that respect. But as I mentioned before, the measure we should be going by, if we want more precision, which is why they were using the state delegate equivalents in Iowa, what we should be using for precision is the popular vote. What they were giving out, what the news was giving out, is the state delegate equivalent, and that is what the person who was running, I forget his name, but the guy who's, he's quit now, I guess, was at the top of things in the Iowa caucuses. What he said, that that's what they use to decide who wins, is the state delegate equivalents, except that those have nothing to do with the presidency. And by that measure, Pete Buttigieg was 0.1% above Bernie Sanders last count that I know of, 0.1%, which is not enough to have a full national delegate more, but that was 0.1% more statewide, or state delegate equivalent. And the state delegate equivalents, of course, don't vote in the Democratic National Convention, so they have that has no saying power in who wins the presidency. So just to clarify that a bit. Any rate, so yeah, I can point at different lines down here, by the way, and it will change who it's giving information for, or they can be selected up here, and I'm going to go ahead and just do that. Just to show how that works, and just on this one state I'm going to do that again, also because of the fact that there were questionable things that happened there, and hopefully we'll get an update later on. But Bernie Sanders was forecasted to win an average of 28% of the vote in Iowa. In 80% of the simulations, he won between 14% and 43% of the vote. He had a 2 in 5 or 41% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who had a 32% chance. It says Sanders won 27% of the vote in the Iowa caucuses. Now, that's the part I want to pay attention to there. Sanders won 27% of the vote. Biden won 14% of the vote. That's way less. Now, how they were forecast is in that paragraph up above, and yeah, Sanders was forecasted to win 28%. He ended up with 27%. Very close to what the forecast predicted. Biden was forecasted to win 26% of the vote. He ended up with 14. The prediction was way off there. Buttigieg was predicted to win 19%. He ended up with 25. It was a bit off there as well. Now again, that may change if we ever get accurate counts. We don't really know. But based on what we think we know, based on what information is being given to us, this is where things stand. Warren was forecasted to get 16% of the vote. She got a little more than that, 20%. Klobuchar was forecast to get 9% of the vote. She got a little more than that, 12%. Basically, the simulation was quite accurate when it came to Bernie Sanders, off by only 1%. Judged Joe Biden way too high, and other candidates substantially low. But basically, in the popular vote, Bernie Sanders wiped the floor with everybody. So that's what should really count anyway. The people voted for Bernie Sanders. What a district voted for really shouldn't matter, because districts aren't people any more than corporations are people. And I know there are people who try to say that corporations are people. Well, no, a cat is a person. Okay, we want to let a cat vote. Okay, I mean, if a cat knows enough about the elections to be able to cast a vote, and if they can qualify as a voter, okay, fine. Or a dog, that's a person. They have a personality. A corporation doesn't have a personality. It has advertisements and products and things like that, but it's not a person. So, yeah, just saying. Okay, try to end the rant there. And moving on. So, let's see, the next one, that was, oh, by the way, that was February 3rd, the Iowa caucuses. And we're moving on now to February 11th, the New Hampshire primaries, or primary. And here's the New Hampshire forecast and results. Scroll that about there. Sanders was forecast to win an average of 28% of the votes. He had a 67% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Buttigieg, who had a 31% chance. Sanders won 26% of the vote in the New Hampshire primary. So he was the winner and was forecast to be the winner. Again, a little bit off, 2% off. It forecast him at 28% of the vote. He ended up with 26%. So, not bad though. Pretty decent prediction overall. So let's move on to the forecasts for contests that haven't happened yet. And the next one coming up is Nevada on February 22nd, so coming up soon. And who will win the Nevada caucuses? It says Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 38% of the vote in Nevada. He has a 70% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 15% chance. Now, I'm reading this in sort of short form, so I don't know if the text shows up well enough that you can read it yourself or not, but if, just so you know, if it looks like there's more text than I'm reading, that's because I'm I'm dropping stuff out to save time because this is a lot of stuff to go over, and this video is going to be long, even shortening it. But yeah, there is a pretty large gap here. If I just bring this up again, you can see that Bernie Sanders is forecast to win 17.2 on the average. Now, we don't actually get point something delegates, but on the average of their simulations, 17.2 delegates in this particular contest, the Nevada caucuses. Biden is expected on the average to win 7.6. So, yeah, again, substantially less, quite a bit less than half as much as Bernie Sanders. And Buttigieg expected to get about half of that. So, yeah. So basically, again, Bernie is expected to win by a landslide. 38% of the vote. Might not seem like a lot if you're thinking about only two candidates, but there aren't just two candidates. We've got several active candidates right now. So 38% of the vote is doing pretty well. Yeah, if we look down at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to scroll this up a little bit. Turning votes into delegates, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 17 pledged delegates out of a possible 36. So 36 is how many are available in that contest. He has a 72% chance of winning the most delegates, much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 16% chance. Yeah, much better is a bit of an understatement, I think. 72% compared to 16%, that's a huge difference. Okay, moving on. Saturday, February 29th, we have the South Carolina primaries, or primary. So who will win the South Carolina primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in South Carolina. The one that's expected to win is who it puts here by default, by the way. Like I said, you can point at these to change which one's displaying, or you can select one from the drop-down menu. But by default, it shows the one that's most likely to win the most. The most votes, I believe that is. Yeah, 31% of the vote. So, yeah. Well, actually, no, I think the way it is it's the one that's predicted most likely to win that contest by whatever measure. So I guess the one expected to win the most delegates. And there again, if we look down at this bottom part, it says Sanders is forecasted to win 22 pledged delegates out of a possible 54. He has a 53% chance of winning the most delegates, a bit better than Biden, who has a 38% chance. So there we go. Actually, that's more than a bit, in my opinion. 38% is a lot less than 53% chance. But yeah, so that's why Bernie Sanders is showing up at the top there, because he has the best chance of winning the most delegates, and so that's what they put in there by default. So yeah, let's see, where was I? So yeah, it says he's forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in South Carolina. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes as opposed to the most delegates. He's also going to get the most votes. A bit better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 37% chance. So moving on now to March 3rd, and there are a bunch of contests in March 3rd. So let's start with where I am, California. Who will win the California primary? March 3rd, also known as Super Tuesday, Tuesday, March 3rd. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in California. He has a 68% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Bloomberg, who has a 12% chance. So yeah, that is a huge difference there. Bernie's got a better than half chance, better than 50%, 68% chance of winning the most votes. Bloomberg has been spending a pile of money on television advertisements, and people should be spending less time watching television anyway. But I do understand why people spend a lot of time watching television, because their lives are rough. I mean, we have rough lives. And television is a way to, get away from that for a while. Take a break. And, well, Bloomberg is taking advantage of that, and advantage of his extreme wealth. He has billions of dollars. He can spare $1 billion or $2 billion to run advertisements to try to prevent Bernie Sanders from making the world a little more fair for the rest of us. So that's what he's spending his money on. And yeah, but the same odds as far as the delegates goes. It says Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 195 pledged delegates out of a possible 415. So a bit less than half of them. Yeah. Notice 31% of the votes. So again, that's pretty close to in line with the predicted votes. And if there were about 3 candidates, each one would be expected to get about 33% on the average. But there aren't 3 candidates. There are more than that. So getting 31% is, again, doing pretty well. He says he has a 68% chance of winning the most delegates, much better than the second most likely Bloomberg, who has a 12% chance. So here in California, if we don't want the billionaires to be able to keep buying our elections, we better fight back. Because they've stepped out of buying politicians, and they've stepped into buying their way into political offices, including the presidency. It's already been done once. Now other billionaires have realized it can be done because one of them did it. And they might have already known it could be done, but they would have rather stayed out. Notice the billionaires didn't run for president until they realized that Bernie was running for president, and all of a sudden we got billionaires running for president because it ain't good enough to just buy a politician to run against Bernie. None of them can beat him because he represents us, and they can't beat us. We outnumber them. Simple fact. So let's go on to another big state in Super Tuesday. How about Texas? Who will win the Texas primary? By the way, if you go to this webpage, if you actually go to projects.538.com/2020-primary-forecast, scroll down to any one of these contests, there is a link to the polls that they use, that they put into their simulation. There's other such information as well if you want to look into those details. Anybody who's detail oriented and has the time and the energy to do that, I'd recommend it at least once. Have a look. So yeah, Who will win the Texas primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 28% of the vote in Texas. He has a 54% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 21% chance. Sanders is forecasted to win 91 pledged delegates out of a possible 228. He has a 55% chance of winning the most delegates, much better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. Next, let's go to North Carolina. Who will win the North Carolina primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the vote in North Carolina. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. Sanders is forecasted to win 39 pledged delegates out of a possible 110. He has a 1 in 2 chance, or 46% chance, of winning the most delegates, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. Again, I'd change the wording in that if it was me. That seems more than a bit. But I'm just reading what's on the page. So, moving on from there, let's go to Virginia. Who will win the Virginia primary? Again, according to this simulation, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the vote in Virginia. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35 pledged delegates out of a possible 99. Again, he's getting the most delegates according to this simulation. He has a 46% chance of winning the most delegates, a bit better than Bloomberg, who has a 24% chance. So there's another state, Virginia, where at least currently Bloomberg is beating Biden. Not by a lot, just by a little tiny bit. But yeah. There again, those odds can change, and Bloomberg is working to change them. He's paying a lot of money to try to change those odds, and those of us who don't have a lot of money can't do that. But what we can do is work hard at it, and that's not easy when we already have to work hard just to get by in life, but at least it's an option we have. We can try. So let's go to the next one. Massachusetts. Also on the same day, this is still Super Tuesday, March 3rd. I'm not sure what order they're in on that day. It might be the order that is being shown here, but I kind of doubt it, because California being first when it's on the West Coast would seem unlikely, but I don't know what time the voting starts, so there's that. But I'm just doing them in the order that they're on this page. So, who will win the Massachusetts primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 28% of the votes in Massachusetts. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Warren, who has a 20% chance. So Warren is second most likely to win the most votes and delegates in Massachusetts. And again, the delegate stuff is very similar. So I think I'll just read the vote stuff. If somebody would prefer I do one of these and just read the delegates, let me know. If you'd prefer I do one and just read the votes and not the delegates to save time, let me know. Just leave a comment, talk to me about this. Let's have a discussion, give me some information, something. I'm not sure what's the best way to do this. I'm just doing the best I can. This is my second video on this site, basically doing the same thing, so hopefully I'll get better at it. But yeah, I think I'll try to save time by skipping the the delegate ones, because it's basically mirroring the votes anyway, and it's really the votes, I think, that matter, or should matter. That's what should be making the difference, and in general it is, but there are some exceptions where where something other than the people ends up with some of the power, and changes things to not quite what the people wanted. So, at any rate, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 28% of the votes, has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, better than Warren with a 20% chance. And delegates, he's forecasted to win 34 pledged delegates out of 91, has a 53% chance of winning the most. Warren has a 21% chance. So that's that. Colorado. Also on Super Tuesday, March 3rd. Who will win the Colorado primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 30% of the vote in Colorado. He has a 64% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 14% chance. How about Tennessee? Who will win the Tennessee primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 28% of the vote in Tennessee. He has a 50% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. And here comes the one. Last time I looked, Biden was ahead in one of two of them. See if he still is. Yep, still showing ahead in Alabama. Who will win the Alabama primary? According to this simulation, Biden is forecasted to win an average of 24% of the vote in Alabama. He has a 39% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than Sanders, who has a 36% chance. That is very slightly different. I would agree with that. And down on the delegates, it's saying that Biden has a 40% chance of winning the most delegates, and Bernie Sanders has a 37% chance of winning the most delegates. Either way, they are both expected to get delegates. It's just a question of how many. And the delegates are divided up in a certain way. Generally, for a given contest, there's a certain number of delegates awarded based on the number of votes in the state, and a certain number of delegates awarded based on the number of votes in each of the districts or counties that the state is divided up into, or something to that effect. And this simulation accounts for that stuff, so it's one of the reasons why tends to be pretty accurate, but one of the things that contributes largely to its inaccuracy, of course, is going to be that we can change the odds. So even if the forecast gets it perfect for the way things are at a given point in time, at a later point in time, they're not necessarily going to still be that way, because we can change the odds. So Biden's got a pretty decent chance of winning most of the votes in Alabama and most of the delegates in Alabama. Well, slightly more than Bernie Sanders anyway, but the most of any one given candidate. If there's a lot of people out there actually strongly supporting Biden and they want to work to make that happen in other states, they could do that. I know there are a lot of people strongly supporting Bernie Sanders, and I hope that a lot of those people will fight to make sure that Bernie gets the most votes and the most delegates in Alabama. We will see. Let's move on to Oklahoma. Who will win the Oklahoma primary? Again, this is still Tuesday, March 3rd, Super Tuesday. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 25% of the vote in Oklahoma. He has a 43% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Bloomberg, who has a 23% chance. How about Arkansas, or Arkansas, however you want to pronounce that? Let's check that one out. Who will win the Arkansas primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 26% of the vote in Arkansas. He has a 42% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than the second most likely winner, Bloomberg, who has a 23% chance. Moving on to Utah. Who will win the Utah primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Utah. He has a 67% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Bloomberg, who has a 14% chance. Let's go on to Maine. By the way, an interesting thing to take note of is that while Bernie Sanders is being forecasted by this simulation to win first place in almost every contest, there isn't any one candidate who is forecasted to win second place in almost every contest. Bernie is the only one who's, literally, Bernie is forecasted to win first or second in every contest. Nobody else is. So, there's that. But again, those odds can change. So, if you want those odds to change them. Make them better odds for Bernie or better odds for someone else. Do your best to make things the way that you feel they should be. That's how democracy is supposed to work. So who will win the Maine primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Maine. He has a 57% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Bloomberg, who has a 14% chance. Now we're moving on to Vermont. Now anybody who knows basically anything about Bernie Sanders probably pretty much knows how this is going to go, because he is the most popular senator in the United States, has been basically the whole time he's been a senator. He was the most popular member of the House of Representatives before that, again for quite a few years. Who will win the the Vermont primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 56% of the vote in Vermont. He has a 96% chance of winning the most votes. Much better than Buttigieg, who has a 1% chance. Let's look at the delegates here, because there's not really a lot of delegates in Vermont. It's kind of a small state. But just to see the numbers here. Sanders is, and I haven't read this already, so I'm just doing this now. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 12 pledged delegates out of a possible 16. So 4 of them are going to somebody else. He wins. In 80% of the simulations, he wins between 8 and 16 delegates. So half to all of them, 80% of the time the simulation is run. And that 12 is right in the middle of that. He has a 97% chance of winning the most delegates. So even slightly better than his chance of winning the most votes. Much better than the second most likely winner, Buttigieg, who has 1 in 100 or 1% chance. Now if we switch that, to show Buttigieg here. It says that he's expected to win 1 pledged delegate. So there are 4 pledged delegates that Bernie is not expected to get on the average. Second most likely gets 1 of them. Bloomberg expected to get 1 of them on the average. Warren expected to get 1 of them on the average. That's 3 of the 4. Biden expected to get 1 of them on the average. No. Klobuchar not expected to get any on the average. Steyer not expected to get any. And Gabbard also not expected to get any. So only 16 delegates. Bernie's going to get most of them. Almost certain. Not 100% certain. So if you're a Vermonter and you're watching this and you want Bernie to win, make sure you actually do get out there and cast your vote. And please do encourage other people as well. Because, again, just because the odds seem to be a certain way, maybe they actually are that way, maybe they're not. But just because they seem to be a certain way doesn't mean they're going to stay that way. Or, for that matter, that they actually are. So we do have to put an effort into making the odds as much as possible the way we would actually like them to be. And I think that's something that can't be overstated. We need to work at it. So I believe this is one more contest for Super Tuesday. I think this is the last one on Super Tuesday. American Samoa. Yeah, that would be the last one on March 3rd, Super Tuesday. Who will win the American Samoa caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 26% of the vote in American Samoa. He has a 33% chance of winning the most votes, slightly better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. So let's move on to March 10th. A week later, also on a Tuesday. And state I grew up in. Who will win the Michigan primary? I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, by the way, which at the time I was growing up, most people in Michigan had never heard of. I'm just saying. So if you've never heard of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and you don't live in Michigan, don't feel bad about it. Still a lot of people in Michigan have never heard of the Upper Peninsula. It's north of northern Michigan. Seriously. Long story behind that, but it's actually factual. So, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in Michigan. He has a 59% chance of winning the most votes. Much better than Biden, who has a 17% chance. That's not very high. Let's move on to Washington. Another one of many places I've lived. Who will win the Washington primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in Washington. He has a 65% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Bloomberg, who has a 15% chance. Also on March 10th, we've got Missouri. Okay, who will win the Missouri primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 27% of the vote in Missouri. He has a 41% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 25% chance. Okay, let's go to Mississippi. Who will win the Mississippi primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 30% of the vote in Mississippi. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 32% chance. Also on March 10th, we have Idaho. Who will win the Idaho primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Idaho. He has a 50% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has an 18% chance. So yeah, slim odds for Biden in that case. Moving on to North Dakota. Who will win the North Dakota primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 30% of the vote in North Dakota. He has a 53% chance of winning the most votes in that contest, much better than Biden, who has a 16% chance. And the last one in the list for March 10th would be Democrats abroad, which is not so much a place as the lack of a specific place that they could put as a label for it, so they named it something else. Yeah, these are people all over the place. Who will win the Democrats abroad primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote for Democrats abroad. He has a 55% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 17% chance. So moving on to March 14th. That would be Saturday, March 14th. Just shortly after the March 10th stuff that we just went over. Who will win the Northern Marianas caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in the Northern Marianas. He has a 43% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. Okay, moving on to Tuesday, March 17th. Let's have a look at Florida. Who will win the Florida primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 31% of the vote in Florida. He has a 47% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 27% chance. Okay, also March 17th we have Illinois, or Illinois as a lot of the locals call it, or Illinois if you want to pronounce it in French. That's French without a French accent. I could speak it with a French accent as well, I suppose. Illinois, but it's basically the same. I'll go with Illinois. It's a hybrid. So, who will win the Illinois primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Illinois. I have lived there, by the way. So, yeah. Not a matter of not knowing how people there pronounce it. I pronounce things the best way I can based on the information I have to go on, and yeah, English phonetics is a mess. Okay, so he's forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Illinois. He has a 54% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has an 18% chance. Again, pretty slim odds. for the second place person. How about Ohio? Who will win the Ohio primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in Ohio. He has a 55% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has an 18% chance. How about Arizona? Who will win the Arizona primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Arizona. He has a 59% chance of winning the most votes, much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 17% chance. Moving on to March 24th. There's one contest on that day. Who will win the Georgia primary? On Tuesday, March 24th. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 32% of the vote in Georgia, the state, not the country. In case anybody's wondering, not that that's likely. He has a 46% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 28% chance. Now, I don't know how many people, have really thought much about what are the odds that a Democrat could win in the general election in Georgia, or other states in that general area, so to speak. But keep in mind, Bernie has been an independent for a very, very long time. He's running as a Democrat for the presidential nomination, and if nominated by the Democratic Party, he has pledged to run for the presidency as a Democrat and serve, if winning under that nomination, as a Democrat in the presidency. But the Democratic Party can't tell him what to do. He is independent. That's why the DNC is fighting so much against him, because basically if he wins, he becomes the head of the Democratic Party. And that doesn't mean he gets to tell them what to do. He doesn't just get his way, but it gives him a lot of leverage to shape the future of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has been, depending on your point of view, for a really long time either doing a very bad job of working for the people, but trying really hard, or maybe not really trying, but doing their best to convince us they're trying. Either way, Bernie would like to make it so they actually do a good job of it. So they try and succeed at actually working for the people. And a lot of the big money donors who donate to a lot of Democratic politicians' campaigns and spend a lot of money on lobbyists to get them to do things for them don't want that. because the huge advantage that they have over the rest of us isn't enough for them. They want security in knowing that they're always going to have that huge advantage over us, and they don't want other super rich people to pass them up. So they don't want other people to have a chance to become super rich, because then those people could pass them up. They don't want other people to even have a chance to become rich, because then they might have the leverage to become super rich. And they're worried about these sorts of things because they're super rich. What else have they got to worry about? Just saying. So yeah, in Georgia, Bernie is forecasted by this simulation to win an average of 32% of the votes. He's expected to get an average of 40 pledged delegates. Biden is expected to get 28, which is second most. So, it's a huge difference there. And Bernie can beat Trump in Georgia. There are lots of Bernie supporters there. If they show up to vote on the primaries, maybe we'll get a better idea just how many. But we know there are enough Bernie supporters in Georgia to get him to win the most delegates there, at least according to this simulation and according to a lot of polls that have come out. So if there are that many Bernie supporters there, if anybody running for the Democratic Party nomination has a chance of getting more votes there in the general election than Trump does, it's Bernie Sanders. Just saying. So moving on to Sunday, March 29th, where the island of Puerto Rico gets to vote. And see what the forecast says about Puerto Rico. Who will win the Puerto Rico primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in Puerto Rico. He has a 50% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Now notice, for those who haven't caught on to the math here, it's saying Bernie has a 50% chance of winning the most votes. That doesn't mean the second runner-up also has a 50% chance of winning the most votes. It doesn't work that way. There are more than two candidates. And that's something a lot of people forget about. Even in the general election, there are often more than two candidates. It doesn't tend to look that way because we usually have one Democrat and one Republican, because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party nominate one candidate each. And all of the smaller parties who put candidates in tend to get ignored by most people because they're smaller. Why are they smaller? Well, they stay that way because people think there's only two choices, and no matter how much they want anything but those two choices, in a lot of cases, they won't vote for a third choice because they think that's throwing their vote away. So instead, what they'll generally end up doing is voting for a candidate they don't want, as a vote meant to be against a candidate they're flat out afraid of. And if you vote for a candidate that you would rather not have win, in preference over another candidate that you would rather not have win, you're not voting in your best interest. You're increasing the chances that who wins is going to be a candidate you don't want. If you actually have a candidate you want, if you can find one you want, even if they're a smaller party or an independent, you really should vote for that candidate. Is that candidate going to win because you voted for them? No, absolutely not. Not because you voted for them, but maybe because other people thought like you and voted for them too. And that's where we need to collectively learn to stop thinking as if everybody else is going to do what we're told they're going to do, because we're told they're going to do that mainly to get us to do what the people who are in control want us to do, and that's how they stay in control. They keep their wealth and their power by convincing us of something that's only true because we're convinced of it. And when we wake up and snap out of that and collectively stop being convinced that what they say is true, it won't be true anymore, because we make the odds. So yeah, Bernie Sanders forecasted to have 35% of the vote, 50% chance of winning the most, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. In the case of the delegates, Bernie is forecasted to get 21 delegates. Biden is forecasted to get, on the average, 12 delegates. From Puerto Rico. So moving on to Saturday, April 4th. We've got 4 different contests there. Let's have a look at Louisiana, or Louisiana as some people prefer to call it. And here we are. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Louisiana. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. Again, that seems like more than a bit to me. I'm not sure exactly how they're doing the math there, but 49% is more than double 22%. That's very substantial in my opinion. Now, I get it. If one candidate has 1% chance of something and the other candidate has 2% chance of the same thing, yeah, the 2% is double 1%, and that still doesn't really seem like a very big difference. So, but what else are they comparing it with? I mean, if you've got, another one who's got a 99% chance compared to the 1% and the 2%, yeah, those two are practically identical. Even though one is twice the size of the other. But if you look at this chart down here, how candidates' chances of winning the most votes have changed, in this case in the Louisiana primary, you can see Biden's chances here, which had been slowly going up, and then right about here just suddenly dropped way down and have kept going down since then. And Bernie Sanders, whose chances have been going slowly up and down, a little up and down, pretty much level for a long time, but more up than down. And then suddenly they started going up, and they've pretty much stayed going up, and now they've leveled off again for a while. Who knows what'll happen from there? But well, right now they're on the rise again. Just saying. So we shall see. But yeah. What I was going to say is, if you look at where they are right now, what that's calling a bit better, 49% is a bit better than 22% chance. There's your 49% chance right there where that dot is on the end of this line. And your 22% chance is way down here, just barely above all these other guys. So, I would say in this case, Joe Biden is doing a little bit better than Bloomberg. Bernie Sanders, in my opinion, is doing a lot better than any of them. But, again, reading the wording on the site, it says a bit better. So, yeah. Sorry, my rants are slowing this down. And I shouldn't let that happen because this video is already over an hour long. Sorry about that. So, continuing onward. Hawaii. Also on April 4th. Who will win the Hawaii primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 38% of the vote in Hawaii. He has a 51% chance of winning the most votes. Much better than Biden, who has a 20% chance. Moving on to Alaska. And again, Sanders is predicted to win. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 41% of the vote in Alaska. He has a 54% chance of winning the most votes. Much better than the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 20% chance. And another one on April 4th, Wyoming. Who will win the Wyoming caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 37% of the vote in Wyoming. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 20% chance. Okay, moving on to Tuesday, April 7th, when Wisconsin votes. Who will win the Wisconsin primary? According to this simulation, Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 36% of the vote in Wisconsin. He has a 55% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has an 18% chance. Moving on to April 28th, Tuesday, April 28th. Let's have a look at New York. Who will win the New York primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in New York. He has a 47% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Bloomberg, who has a 27% chance. How about Pennsylvania? Who will win the Pennsylvania primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in Pennsylvania. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. Moving on to Maryland. Who will win the Maryland primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Maryland. He has a 45% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 26% chance. Moving on to the state of Connecticut, or Connecticut, if you want to read it phonetically. Who will win the Connecticut primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 36% of the vote in Connecticut. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 21% chance. And now let's have a look at Rhode Island. And again, Bernie Sanders is expected to win there. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 39% of the vote in Rhode Island. He has a 57% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 19% chance. Now, Biden, last I looked, was expected to win the next state I'm bringing up, the contest in Delaware. Let's see if that's still the case. If the simulation is still showing Biden as the most likely. No, it's not. Now it's showing Sanders as the most likely to win in Delaware. So far, only one contest where Sanders is not predicted by this this simulation to be the outright winner. Delaware was one of the two that I knew of where it was different, and I had gone through them all before. Like I said, I did another video like this once. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in Delaware. He has a 41% chance of winning the most votes, essentially tied with the second most likely winner, Biden, who has a 39% chance. So yeah, 39% is essentially tied with 41%. I'll agree with that. That's pretty accurate wording. If you look at the delegates, it says Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 8 pledged delegates out of a possible 21. Again, if I bring up the sidebar on this one, you can see there's your 7.7 for Sanders being rounded to 8 in that description at the bottom of the page. And Biden has 7.1, which would be rounded to 7. So on the average, in the average of the simulation, Biden is coming up with 7 delegates, and Sanders getting 8. So, pointing at these, getting different people. What, Harris? No longer active. I'm pointing at the bottom line, and it's picking random people down there. Yeah. So, that's interesting. Anyway, moving on from Delaware on Tuesday, April 28th. Let's have a look at the 2 contests on Saturday, May 2nd, starting with the one in Kansas. Who will win the Kansas primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 38% of the vote in Kansas. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 21% chance. So, moving on to the other contest on Saturday, May 2nd. We're not in Kansas anymore. Who will win the Guam caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 36% of the vote in Guam. He has a 44% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Okay, let's move on to the one and only place with a contest on Tuesday, May 5th for the Democratic primaries, and that would be Indiana. Who will win the Indiana primary? Sorry, excuse me, my nose is itching. It's bugging the heck out of me. Not a good thing when I'm on camera, but it is what it is. And yeah, this video's been long. Who will win the Indiana primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 33% of the vote in Indiana. He has a 46% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Buttigieg, who has a 19% chance. Buttigieg. I should pronounce that more phonetically. Yeah, there's an I before the E. Or Buttigieg. Yeah. Double T after the U. That would be a short U sound. Buttigieg. I hear that pronounced so many different ways. I can't pick one of the ones that other people are pronouncing because it doesn't look like any of them. It doesn't look like what I've been pronouncing either, apparently. So and I don't pronounce it the same way every time. Not for lack of trying. Although there is that. Most of the time I really don't try, but that's not really the reason. It's just, I don't know what's the right way, or if there is a right way. Anyway, yeah, so Buttigieg has a 19% chance of getting the most votes in Indiana, according to this simulation. Bernie Sanders has a 46% chance. And that's on Tuesday, May 5th. Moving on to Tuesday, May 12th, a week later. Have a look at Nebraska. Who will win the Nebraska primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 34% of the vote in Nebraska. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 21% chance. Also on Tuesday, May 12th, we have West Virginia. Who will win the West Virginia primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in West Virginia. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. Okay, moving on to Tuesday, May 19th. There's a couple of contests on that day as well. So let's have a look at Oregon. or Oregon, as some people pronounce it, or Oregon, as other people pronounce it. Yeah. I'll go with Oregon. Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 38% of the vote in Oregon. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, much better than Biden, who has a 21% chance. So, yeah. Now, an interesting note in this case. While Biden is showing as the second most likely to win the most pledged delegates, Bloomberg is shown as the one with the second most delegates on the average in the same contest. I'm going to bring that up and show you what I'm talking about. There's Sanders with 25.8, Bloomberg with 12.6, and Biden with 12.5. Now, both 12.6 and 12.5 would round up to 13. But again, these are averages from thousands of times running the simulation. So, Bloomberg has the higher average. But having enough to actually be the one with the most votes or the most delegates is slightly different than just the average number of delegates in each iteration of the simulation. So yeah, so it came up with two different people there, very close to the same. Notice 12.6%, 12.6 delegates or 12.5 delegates. I mean, even as an average, that's very close to the same thing. And as far as the actual average number of votes or the average number of delegates, let's have a look. If I go to Biden, let's see, it says Bernie's forecasted to win an average of 26 delegates. Oh, that's right. Well, that's oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that is the average number of delegates. So yeah, if I switch this here again, we get 12. It didn't round up. It rounded down for Biden, and for Bloomberg, it rounded up. So 12.5 it rounded down, 12.6 it rounded up. I have no idea why 12.5 rounded down. I didn't expect it to do that, but it did. Yeah, that's interesting. But looking at the odds, it's showing Biden with a 21% chance of getting the most delegates, and Bloomberg with an 18% chance of getting the most delegates. And looking up here at the chances of getting the most votes, again, Bloomberg has a 20% chance of getting the most votes in Oregon. Biden has a 19% chance, 21%. Wait a minute. Biden has 21% chance of getting the most votes. Bloomberg has 18% chance of getting the most votes. So Biden has a higher percent chance of getting the most votes, but a lower percent chance of getting the most delegates. Wait, no. I'm just confused now. Oop, I went to the wrong person here. Okay, Bloomberg has an 18% chance of winning the most delegates, and Biden has a 21% chance. So, Sanders, Biden. No, that's right. It's showing Biden in second place, second most likely, but Bloomberg with slightly more delegates on the average. So, yeah, it's just confusing. I shouldn't spend so much time on that because I'm just confusing myself. Sorry about that. Moving on. The other contest on the same day, Tuesday, March 19th, would be Kentucky. So let's have a look at that, shall we? Who will win the Kentucky primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in Kentucky. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 21% chance. Moving on to Tuesday, June 2nd. There's one contest on that day in New Jersey. And, let's see, how many total? There are 5 contests in total on that day. So, yeah, I should have worded that better. Who will win the New Jersey primary on Tuesday, June 2nd? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 37% of the vote in New Jersey. He has a 48% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. Moving on to New Mexico, who will win the New Mexico primary? It's bizarre thoughts. I'm just thinking, yeah, the aliens, of course, they're gonna land their flying saucer, and it's a New Mexico joke. I'm pretty sure nobody in New Mexico is going to appreciate it. Nah, that's probably not right. There's got to be somebody out there who would think, yeah, that's funny as hell. At any rate, who will win the New Mexico primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 39% of the vote in New Mexico. He has a 52% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. So, again, it says a bit. 52% is more than double 22%. So, I'd say that's a very big difference, and Bernie is much more likely than Biden to get the most votes and the most delegates in New Mexico. Just saying. So let's move on to the other Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. Who will win the District of Columbia primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 37% of the vote in the District of Columbia. He has a 47% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 24% chance. So how about Montana? Who will win the Montana primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in Montana. He has a 47% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. And South Dakota. Who will win the South Dakota primary? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 35% of the vote in South Dakota. He has a 49% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 22% chance. Let's move on to Saturday, June 6th, the last contest in the Democratic primaries and caucuses before the Democratic National Convention. Who will win the Virgin Islands caucuses? Sanders is forecasted to win an average of 36% of the vote in the Virgin Islands. he has a 43% chance of winning the most votes, a bit better than Biden, who has a 23% chance. And so there we are back at the completed ones, Iowa and New Hampshire. And back up at the top of the page, have another quick look at this. Bernie with a 41% chance of having more than half of pledged delegates in the Democratic National Convention, and 36% chance that no one will get more than half of the pledged delegates. Let's see if this is updated. 10:30 a.m. I don't think that was the time that was showing when I started it. So it has updated while I've been doing this, and I've been refreshing the page on the way for each contest. So yeah, interesting to note. If I refresh it one more time, 10:13 a.m. Yeah, so it's staying there. 41% Bernie, 36% no one, 12% Biden. So yeah, that's where we're at right now. And again, as far as the average predicted number of delegates, we've, each one of those contests has a number listed for that, and here are the totals, where Sanders is expected on the average to get 1,640. I believe that was 1,660 last I looked at it, so it's gone down a little bit. It does that. It'll go down, it'll go up, it'll go down, it'll go up. Still, well, let's see. No, it's not more than double what Biden has anymore. It's close to double, but not more than double. It was more than double. I think Biden's went up a little and Bernie's went down a little. But I know there are mainstream media people out there who would look at that and go, "Oh, look, Bernie's losing and Biden's winning because Biden went up and Bernie went down," because they're lying to us and maybe to themselves. No, Bernie Sanders still, according to this prediction, has around twice as many expected delegates as Joe Biden. The fact that it's changed a little bit does not change that fact. Having around twice as much isn't losing. It's kind of like when they basically went, well, yeah, okay, so Bernie won in New Hampshire, but if you add up all the other candidates, they beat him collectively. So what does that mean? I mean, okay, if there were a lot of people who wanted to vote against Bernie Sanders and they were voting for all these other candidates as a vote against Bernie Sanders, I could see using that logic. But I think the only people who really want to vote against Bernie Sanders are the super rich people who are worried that he's going to upset the balance of power and wealth in this country, and they might turn out not to be quite as rich and powerful as they are now when it's all said and done. But I would like to point out, and probably none of them are going to hear me say this, but maybe other people can hear me, maybe somebody who's been nice enough to watch this whole video, because, it's a new YouTube channel for me. It would be nice if somebody actually watched the whole video. Might hear this and maybe tell other people, and maybe the word will get around. Here's the thing. The world we live in would be a better place if we had a better situation for most people. And the rich people can't buy that. Their money can't buy them that. I mean, even a rich person trying to buy his way into the presidency, they don't know better than we do. Just because they've got more money doesn't mean they know better than we do. I mean, especially not better than us collectively. We've got hundreds of millions of brains. They've got collectively, what, a few dozen? I mean, you know, individually they've got one, just like any one of us. You know, we can be wrong just as easily as they can be wrong just as easily as we can. But because they have a lot of money, if they're wrong, it can do huge amounts of damage to the world we live in. The rest of us don't have to worry about that. We don't have enough money to hugely damage the world if we're wrong about something. Individually, at least. Collectively, yeah, we still could. But collectively, most of us aren't going to make those kinds of mistakes, generally speaking. Now, collectively, we have been sort of destroying our environment, and we have to collectively fix that. But, you know, we're working on it, and that's something we need to do. And having people who, you know, have a lot of money and are making a lot of money off of that error continuing to be made, that's not doing us a lot of good. When they want to pour their money into trying to make sure that we can't fix the problem, that we can't repair the damage we're doing. Just not good. So yeah, if anybody wants to check this site out, here's a little section I hadn't read earlier. Welcome to our new 2020 Democratic primary forecast. Predicting the primaries is a tricky business. See something you think is wrong, send us an email. How does 538 forecast elections? Read our methodology. See the polls behind the forecast, all national polls. So those are things you can do. Click on read our methodology. Here's how 538 2020 primary model works. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'll just read a little bit, give you a feel for it, how our primary model works. Here at 538, we've never built a complete back-to-front model of the presidential primaries before. Instead, in 2008, 2012, and 2016, we issued forecasts of individual primaries and caucuses on piecemeal basis using polls and demographics. We always thought there were too many complexities involved. How the outcome in one state can affect the next one, for example, to build a full-fledged primary model. So that's how it was, and it says, but this year we're giving it a shot. We built a forecast that plays out the outcome of the 57 select contests, 50 states, DC, 5 territories. I thought there were 58. They're saying 57 here. Am I wrong? Did they make an error? I don't know. It says 50 states, 5 territories, and Democrats abroad. That's 56. Oh, DC. That's 57. So, okay. Maybe they're 57 then. Any rate, like I said, not going to read that whole thing. I will leave it up on the screen, or part of it, as I go over some of the credits I mentioned I would try to get to. That this the forecast model, according to somewhere on the website, I came up, copied this information down for later, is forecast model is by Nate Silver. It says design and development by Ryan Best, Jay Boyce. I might pronounce some of these names badly, by the way, but I'll do my best. Aaron Bykoff, Chris Grosskopf, Ella Coes or Coeze, I'm not sure which, Jasmine Mithani, Emily Scherer, and is there more? Hold on, making sure I'm not missing something here. Oh yeah, there's more on that line. Julia Wolf and Yutong Yuan, and research by Drummill Mehta, Derek Sean and Mary Radcliffe, and illustrations by Fabio Buonocore. So Fabio Buonocore. So yeah. Looking at another paragraph here. Also, I suppose we're feeling frisky these days. If building a full-fledged primary model presents its share of challenges, some of which I'll describe here, there are also plenty of problems with publishing a half-assed forecasting product. Meanwhile, trying to navigate your way through the primaries without any sort of forecasting product would present bigger challenges still. So yeah, and again, like I said, it's nice that somebody has built this. It's about time, and if there's another one out there, somebody please let me know if you know about it. I think other ones should be built. This should have been done a long time ago, but as they're saying, it's not an easy thing to do. It would have been nice if that was done before I was born, but hey, computers barely existed back then, let alone powerful computers with talented programmers to write simulations for them. So any rate, what's this they're talking about? Our model is forecast. It is not an estimation of what would happen in an election held today. Okay, so that's a clarification for anybody who might have wondered about that. Because yeah, there are some polls where people are asked how would you vote if the election were held today, and this is not trying to predict what would happen in such a hypothetical situation. This is trying to predict what will happen in the actual situation, and that's actually a much harder thing to do. But like I said, it seems to be having some pretty good accuracy with it. We shall see in the long run. But so far, it's predicting Bernie Sanders winning right now. As of right now, it's predicting Bernie Sanders to win in every single contest except for Alabama. And they mentioned Delaware here, which was, I believe that was the other one that last time I looked, Joe Biden was predicted to do slightly better than Bernie Sanders there, and now he's not. What does it say about that? Our model is a forecast, not an estimation of what would happen if an election were held today. Forecasted results in later states reflect bounces from earlier states and other contingencies. For example, upon launch, our model gives former Vice President Joe Biden only about a 60% chance of winning Delaware, his home state. Why only 60%? Isn't Biden hugely popular there? Well, yes, and Biden would almost certainly be a massive favorite in Delaware if it were the first state to vote. And this is a very good point. But in reality, Delaware votes relatively late in the process on April 28th, and there's a chance that Biden will have dropped out by that time, or that his campaign will otherwise be severely diminished. The model accounts for these possibilities. And yeah, and that's exactly what has ended up happening, that his campaign is so badly diminished it would be no surprise if he did drop out before getting to his home state. And even if he does stick it out until that state, now Bernie is expected to win there. After which, I would expect Biden would probably drop out slightly more humiliated than he would have been if he dropped out before that state. So yeah, our forecast is probabilistic. The degree of uncertainty in the primaries is high, and the process is path dependent and non-linear. The nomination process consists of layers of uncertainty piled on top of one another. And again, I'm not going to read this whole thing. You can go to the website and look for yourself. The link to this page will be on the other page, and the other page I will link in the description. So, yeah. So heading back to OBS Studios, which is what I'm recording this in, and I'm going to end this video. To anybody who does watch this, thank you. To anybody who shares it with other people, thank you very much. I know it's long. It's nearly 2 hours long. If anybody has a suggestion for a shorter format that I could put useful stuff in from this website or from other websites, or some other such thing, let me know, and maybe I can experiment with it. I'm just trying to put something valuable out there for people. Obviously, I'm putting time and effort into this, so I hope somebody gets something out of it. Thanks.